Hello, welcome to the Profile Financial Institute. We're pleased to present at no charge or obligation to you this CFP board-approved continuing education course for certified financial planners. The course format is audio, and you can either stream it on your computer or you can listen at your convenience by downloading it to your MP3 player or smartphone. If you prefer, we've prepared a transcript of the course which you can download and read. As it is with all self-study CE courses, to receive CE credit, the CFP board requires you to complete a short test after you finish the course. Our test format is true-false, and you'll earn 1 hour of CE credit upon its successful completion.
Hello and welcome. I'm David Shapiro of the Profile Financial Institute. Our continuing education courses are given by prominent business professionals and leading educators and are designed to provide practical tools and actionable techniques to help CFPs grow and manage their businesses. Today, we are most fortunate to have with us Professor Dan Ariely, formerly Professor of Behavioral Economics at MIT and currently Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. Many of you are familiar with Dan's best-selling and amusing books, The Upside of Irrationality and Predictably Irrational. If not, I'm sure you will instantly become new admirers of Dan after today's course, which is entitled The Anatomy of Cheating and Dishonesty. With that, let's get started.
Hello, my name is Dan Ariely. I'm the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics. And I want to talk to you today a little bit about dishonesty and conflicts of interest and something about fiduciary responsibilities. But before we start, let me just say a couple of words about behavioral economics. So standard economics is a beautiful study that looks at axiomatic ideas about how people should behave. People should have complete preferences, they should understand what they're doing, they should know what they want, and they should be unencumbered by computational limitation. We should be able to see all the way into our future, we should be able to compute everything, and we should make always the right decisions. And then, rather than just being an axiomatic model of behavior, economics has gone a couple of steps forward, saying not only is it a model of behavior, but it's the best model of behavior. And if you only knew economics, you could perfectly well design interventions, create taxes, and so on. So from being a descriptive study, economics has moved to being a proscriptive study about how we should do things. Behavioral economics, on the other hand, is an agnostic kind of a discipline. It says we don't know if people are rational or irrational. We don't have a particular view on that. Instead, what we are is empirical. We are going to put people in different situations. We're going to examine empirically what they do. We're going to look at field data. We're going to look at lab data. And we're going to come with some empirical generalizations of when and where people behave according with rational theory, which means that all the implication then would carry out, and when do we believe that people don't behave perfectly rationally, and therefore we should think very differently about the behavior we prescribe and what rules and regulations we should put in place. And it turns out that the area of conflicts of interest is one of those areas where people deviate dramatically for what we think people should be doing and from what people who would be rational would behave. And because of that, it's a particularly important area to study. So that's in terms of introduction. And now let's start talking about what have we learned about irrational behavior. So I became interested in cheating and dishonesty when Enron erupted on the field. And if you remember, and I'm sure you do, this was a big incident that kind of made, I think, public awareness of what was going on in the field of accounting or what could be the dangers. But for me, it asked the following question. Is Enron better explained by thinking about three bad apples, three individuals who basically betrayed the trust that was given to them? Or is it better described by thinking about something larger and systematic that might be wrong? That maybe the right model is not three bad apples, but a lot of slightly blemished apples. Which one of those is a better model that described the behavior? And this was an important question because if you think it's only about 3 bad apples, then you can say, I have a prescription, just don't hire bad apples. We just need to think about how we improve the hiring process. But if you think that it's a more endemic problem that far outreach the 3 bad apples, then you have to think about systematically about what was it about the structure of Enron and maybe the structure of other companies that allowed this to happen, and maybe we should think about how to prevent this from happening in the future. So anyway, to look at this, I started by creating a very simple set of experiments. And the basic paradigm was the following. I gave one group of people a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems. They were so simple that everybody could solve them given enough time. Each problem was basically a set of numbers, and you had to find 2 numbers that add to 10. 2.48 and 7.52, something like that. But there were other numbers, so you had to look at all the possible combinations and find the 2 numbers that add to 10. And you had 20 of those, and I would tell you, for example, you have 5 minutes to go, solve as many of those as you can, and when you finish, I'll pay you $1 per question. Okay, so imagine you were in the test, you got the sheet, you turn it over, you started working feverishly. When the 5 minutes are over, I say, please stop, count how many questions you got correctly, come to me, let's go over how many questions you got correctly, and then I'll pay you accordingly. And people counted, they came to me, they told me how many they counted correctly, they were correct. It's a kind of a question that people know how many they solved correctly, and I pay them accordingly. This was the control condition. In the second condition, at the end of the 5 minutes, I said, please stop, go to the back of the room, and shred your piece of paper. Shred it completely, and then come to me and tell me how many questions you got correctly. So people came. What happened? In the first group, people claimed to solve an average 4 problems. I mean, they were correct. They solved an average 4 problems. In the second group, people claimed to solve 6 problems. So people cheated. Now you might ask, how was this increased cheating? Where did it come from? Did it come from a few bad apples who skewed the distribution? Or did it come from many people who cheat just by a little bit? And it turns out it comes from many people who cheat just by a little bit. Okay, so now we have our basic paradigm and our basic structure. And now let's take a step back. Let's ask the question of why do people cheat to start with? And the theory for cheating came to us from Gary Becker. And a long time ago, the story goes that Gary Becker was waiting for a dissertation defense. He was driving around the University of Chicago, and he was looking for legal parking. And he was not finding legal parking. And he asked himself, what should he do? Should he continue to look for legal parking and maybe miss the dissertation defense? Or should he park illegally and get to the dissertation defense on time? And Becker decided to park illegally and get to the dissertation defense on time. Now, after he was doing it, he came back and he said that he was contemplating the ideal theory of crime, because he was thinking very explicitly about the costs and benefits. He was thinking about what he would gain from parking illegally and what he would lose, and what he would gain and lose from parking illegally. And he was comparing the fear of getting a ticket and the fine connected to it with the benefit of getting to the dissertation defense on time. And his conclusion was that in this case, it's best to park illegally. Okay, and there the theory of rational crime was born, which basically says that every time that we're faced any situation, we're thinking about 3 elements. We're thinking about what do we stand to gain from the crime, what's the probability of being caught, and what will be the punishment if we get caught. Now, if you take this seriously, it means that every time you look at your clients' portfolios, or you look at their information, or every time you pass by a gas station, you should be asking yourself, what can I gain and what can I lose here? How much money can I gain if I'll be dishonest? What's the chance I'll be caught if I'm not honest? And how much time in prison will I get? And I know that this theory probably sounds ridiculous, and it sounds as if it's not describing correctly how any of you behave. But at the same time, I want you to realize that this is the theory of crime, who is the main driver for our legal understanding and the way we think about laws and regulations. Okay, so we decided to test this theory. So the first element we wanted to test is what happens when you pay people more money per question. So we got different conditions. Some people we paid 10 cents per correct question. Some people got paid 50 cents. Some people got paid $1, $2, $5, even $10 per correct question. And what we were wondering is what happens when the amount of payment per condition goes up. Would people cheat more? And what we found is that no. Lots of people cheated, just by a little bit, and the amount of cheating did not go up as the amount of payment increased. Okay, so that was the first element of the Becker model. It didn't seem that the amount per question was making any difference. The second thing we tried to test was what about the probability of being caught? Now we had a few conditions. Some people did not shred their sheet of paper, so there was you could catch them if they cheated, and they indeed did not cheat. Some people shredded half a sheet of paper, so there was some evidence remaining. Some people shred the whole sheet of paper, and some people shredded the whole sheet of paper, left the room, and paid themselves from a ball of money that had over $100 in it. And you would wonder whether those people would cheat more. What did we find? No. As the probability of being detected goes down, the probability of increased cheating does not go up. Okay, so the two first parts of the Becker model did not seem to make any difference. It did not seem like it was the case that as people have decreased probability of being caught, that they cheat more. So what we concluded from the first two parts is that at least the first two parts of the Becker model did not seem to describe what people are doing, and maybe we need a different theory to think about dishonesty. And we thought that maybe what is going on here is that people try to balance two things. We try to look in the mirror and feel that we're honest, wonderful, caring people. You can think of this as some ego utility, some benefit that we're getting from our own definition of ourselves. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we have the economic incentives in which we want to benefit from cheating. It's not that the economic incentives don't hold, it's just that they are one part of the picture. And maybe what we're doing is we're trying to benefit those two elements. We're trying on one hand to look at ourselves and think wonderful and honorable people, how wonderful and honorable people we are. On the other hand, we're trying to benefit from cheating. And you might think, how can you do both? You can choose, you can do one or the other. But maybe due to our flexible psychology, we can do both as long as we cheat just a little bit. Maybe as long as we cheat just a little bit, we can think of ourselves as honest and at the same time be slightly dishonest. And we call this the fudge factor. And kind of intuitively, you can think about it as imagine that you file your taxes and you have 10 questionable receipts. 10 times in which you went with a family member to dinner, and yes, they asked you how work was going, but it was a really business meal. How comfortable would you feel about submitting those? And could you, for example, decide that you're going to submit only one or two of those as a way to kind of balance for yourself your feelings of desire to feel you are an honest person and at the same time desire to benefit a little bit from cheating? So how would we test something like this? The idea for the first test came to us from a little joke. And the joke is that a guy goes to the rabbi. I'll give you the Jewish version. You can make up your own. A guy goes to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. Last week I was in synagogue, and when I left synagogue, I discovered somebody stole my bike. Somebody stole my bike from synagogue." And the rabbi is saying, "This is terrible. This is awful. How can it be that somebody is stealing your bike from synagogue? I'm appalled by the idea. Here is what you do. Next week, when you come to synagogue, sit in the front row. And as we go over the 10 commandments, look at the audience. Turn around and look at the audience. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you in the eyes. See who is too bashful to look you in the eyes. And you know that's the person who took your bicycle." The guy is very excited about the the idea. He comes next week to synagogue. He sits in the front row. They get to the Ten Commandments. He turns around. The rabbi is very excited to figure out did his advice work. So he waits for this guy at the end of service and says, "So, did it work?" And the guy said, "You wouldn't believe it. It worked like a charm. The moment we got to 'Thou shalt not commit adultery,' I remember where I left my bike." Now, you might not find this joke very amusing, and you might not see how it leads to our next experiment. But our next experiment was basically asking people to try to recall the Ten Commandments. We went to UCLA in Los Angeles, and we asked 500 students to try and recall the Ten Commandments. I should also tell you that none of them could recall all 10 commandments, and quite a few of them invented some interesting commandments. But that put aside, after they finished trying to recall the 10 commandments, we gave them a chance to take our test and shred the pieces of paper and cheat. And what did we find? We find that people who just tried to recall the 10 commandments did not cheat at all. Now, it wasn't as if the more religious people, the people who remembered more commandments, cheated less, and the people who didn't remember many of the commandments, cheated more. No, it was across the board. No matter how many commandments you remembered, you were not likely to go ahead and cheat. In fact, we took it a step further. We took a group of students who were self-declared to be atheists, and we asked them to swear on the Bible, and then we gave them a chance to cheat, and what we found is they didn't cheat at all. So even people who have no affiliation to the Bible and to the Ten Commandments, the moment that they swear on it, stop cheating. So this was an interesting finding, but of course we were not going to advocate bring the Ten Commandments back to civil life and starting to recall the Ten Commandments all the time. And since I work at the university, I thought about what about the honor code? The honor code is something that universities do. How about if we use that? So at the time I was working at MIT, and I created a survey. In the beginning, we asked some of the students to sign an honor code statement, which said, "I understand that this short survey falls under the MIT honor code." And then they shredded their piece of paper and had a chance to cheat. What happened? No cheating whatsoever. And it's important to understand that there was no cheating whatsoever, despite the fact that MIT doesn't have an honor code. So the students were signing something that had no meaning and no consequences, and nevertheless they did not cheat. Now, we took this and we went to Princeton. Princeton University has a very strong honor code. They take the students and they run them through a week-long course on honesty, lectures, discussions. The a cappella group has songs about morality and the honor code. I mean, the whole thing is very much about the importance of the honor code and indoctrination to the honor code. We waited 2 to 3 weeks after they finished this crash course on morality, and we stopped the students at the running around Princeton University, and we asked them to sign. We asked them to take our little test for money in the same way that the MIT students did. And again, some of them signed the honor code and some of them didn't. So what do you think? Did the students from Princeton who just got this crash course on morality behaved any differently from the students at MIT who had no crash course on morality and no honor code? No, they behaved just the same. They cheated by about 2 questions when they didn't sign the honor code, and they did not cheat at all when they did sign the honor code. And this was the same for the Princeton students and for the MIT students. So this is kind of a mixture of good news, bad news. The bad news is that a week-long crash course in morality plus a very stringent honor code doesn't seem to matter to people's dishonesty. The good news is that whether people have an honor code or whether they have this week-long crash course on morality, if you remind them about their own morality just before they are tempted to cheat, people don't seem to cheat that much. So we have this tendency to want to be honest. We just need to be reminded of that. So with this idea in mind, we went to the IRS and we say, hey, look what we found. We found that if people sign something at the end, it doesn't help. It's too late. It's over. If somebody fills their tax forms, by the time they get to the end of the form, it's too late, and there's no chance that they will go back and fix anything. What we need to do is we need to get people to sign in the beginning, to prime their morality, to get them to think in more moral terms. So the nice people at the IRS told us this was not legal. You can't get people to sign before they filled anything. So we came back and we said, what if people sign in the beginning and at the end, both places? They said, well, that's confusing. So we said, what if the first item in the tax form would be, would you give $25 to a task force to fight corruption? And we said, if people wrote yes to that, not only would they have reflected on their own morality and the importance of morality, but they would actually put some money down to support this notion, and now they might be even more committed to their own morality. Plus, we said, if people don't say yes to this question and they choose not to donate $25 to a task force to fight corruption, maybe you want to audit them. Anyway, the IRS said that they have better things to do than to deal with us at this point. But we did find an insurance company. And this was interesting. The people in this insurance company told us that the insurance industry in general loses about $24 billion a year to exaggerated claims. And what they said was that these exaggerated claims do not come from a lot of it, most of it, the vast majority. It doesn't come from a few people who invent burglaries and arsonies and so on, but it comes from lots and lots of people who invent slightly larger television and slightly more expensive jewelry. Basically, lots of people cheating by 10-15%, creating a very big number in total. So we had lots of ideas. We say, why don't we play religious music when people are on hold? Why don't we get people to sign at the beginning of the form? Why don't we change the concreteness of the reporting? We had all kinds of ideas, and after 6 months of going back and forth, they said they were not interested. They said we can't do it. But they said that they have another form that nobody seemed to care much about, in which people are asked to declare how many miles they drove last year. And of course, if you get this form, you want to declare that you drove less than you really drove, because that means that your insurance premium would be lower. So they gave us 20 of those. Forms, and we changed one thing. We basically changed the line on the signature. So for half of the people, they signed like usually. They first got the form, they filled the number, and then they signed. And half the people, another 10,000 people, did it the opposite way. They first signed the form, and then they filled the number. And what we found was that the people who signed first reported to be driving more, which means they cheated less. They reported to be driving 2,700 miles more on average. Now, what this means is that we don't know if they did not cheat at all, but we do know that they cheated much less. And we know that the difference was about 15% of the driving, which is quite substantial. Now, here's a question for you. What do you think? Did the people who gave us this ability to do experiments with them in the insurance company, they start using our form to get people to report on their driving? Sadly, the answer is no. And did they start inviting us to help them with loss forms and procedures? And the answer, of course, is no. As a side note, I should say that often people think about individual people as irrational, and companies are rational. Because, of course, companies have professional people who are making decisions repeatedly, who are experts in their domain, and so on. But the sad truth is that I think that companies are actually less rational. I think that the fact that we have lots of people who are trying to maintain their jobs, plus lots and lots of lawyers, actually make it harder for people to be rational rather than easy. But anyway, we had some good news, not with that company, but we had some good news that we could get people to be less dishonest and more honest if they just got to think about their own morality just prior to filling out the forms. And we don't know how long these effects last, but at least there's some hope in creating some kind of priming of morality at the moment when people are tempted. So this was part one. Now for part two, we wanted to figure out how we get people to cheat more. if we believe in this fuzziness, in this fudge factor theory, then we need to think about how do we get people to cheat more in this idea. Not as an objective for life, I think there's enough cheating in the world, but just to understand the theory better. The idea here also came from a little joke, and the little joke is that little Jimmy comes home from school with a note that says that little Jimmy stole a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to him. And Jimmy's father is furious, and he said, "Jimmy, this is not how we raised you and educated you. You never, never, never steal a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to you. And beside, Jimmy, you're grounded now for 3 weeks, and just wait until your mother comes, then you'll get the real punishment. And beside, Jimmy, if you need a pencil, you can always ask. You can just say something, because I can bring you dozens of pencils from work." Now, if you find this amusing, it's because I think we all understand at some level that while we could easily take a pencil from work and not feel bad about it from a moral perspective, taking 10 cents from petty cash box is something that we feel very differently about, and the question is why? And one possibility is that the moment something gets to be multiple steps removed from money, we somehow start to think about it very differently. And this was the next thing we wanted to test, this idea that as things get more and more far from money, there's more stories we can tell ourselves. There's more stories you can tell yourself about why it's okay to take a pencil from work than why is it okay to take 10 cents from a petty cash box. So the first experiment I did on this is I walked around MIT and I distributed 6 packs of Cokes in the refrigerators in the dorms. Now, these were refrigerators that were common to many people, the refrigerator, but the goods inside were belonging to particular individuals. And I put the 6 packs of Cokes there. They would not belong to anybody, but I didn't know about it. And the question is, how quickly will they disappear? And perhaps not surprisingly, they disappeared quite quickly. In 72 hours, nothing was left. This is what is called the half-lifetime of Coke. How quickly does it go away? Anyway, so this was the disappearance of Coke, and to contrast this to something, I also put in other refrigerators, I put a plate with 6 $1 bills. Now, the students could have taken the bills, they could have gone to a vending machine, they could have got Coke and change, but nobody has ever done that. Okay? So the money remained there all the time. And the question is, how can that be? Why were people leaving the cash but taking the Coke? And again, I think that the idea is that there's something very different about taking cash. Now, you probably are not so happy with this experiment because it's true, it's not a good social science experiment. You often find Cokes in refrigerators, and it's not so often that we find a plate with $6 bills in a refrigerator. So in the next experiment, we went back to our shredding manipulation, and we got people, 1/3 of the people got the sheets, they solved them, they came to us and said, "Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X dollars," we paid them. Another third of the people solved the problems, counted them, shredded the sheet of paper, came to us and said, "Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X dollars," but with no evidence. And the third group shredded the sheet of paper, came to us and said, "Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X tokens." And we gave them tokens, and they took those tokens, they walked 12 feet to the side and changed it for money. In other words, they cheated for something that was not money, but was something that was a representation of money one step removed from it. It was going to be removed from it for just a few seconds. And the question is, in this condition, which was slightly resembling the pencil metaphor, did people cheat more? And the answer was that our students doubled their cheating in that condition. And that's actually the experiment that worries me the most from all of our experiments. Because if you think about it, we are moving to a cashless society. We're moving to a society in which things are not represented by money, but there are multiple steps removed. You can think about stocks and stock options and mortgage-backed securities. And the question could be, if this is correct and being one step removed from money gets people to cheat more and feel more comfortable doing so, what does it mean about being multiple steps removed from money? And could it be that with stock options, different derivative, people find it very easy to be dishonest while at the same time still thinking of themselves as honest people? We'll come back to the stock market and the financial crisis in a second, but I do want to tell you about one more experiment. In this experiment, we wanted to find out what happens when you see around you cases of extreme dishonesty. So we did the experiment again, but with two changes in the procedure. The first one was that we prepaid people. Everybody got an envelope with all the money for the experiment as if they solved all the problems, and we asked them to pay us back the money they did not make. So after you finish doing the experiment, you would take the money you didn't make and put it in a different envelope and give it back to us, leave it on your seat. The second change of this experiment was that we hired an acting student. We asked him to sit in the front row, and 30 seconds into the experiment, raised their hand and said, Mr. Experimenter, I solved everything. What do I do next? Now think about it. Imagine you were in the experiment, you were sitting there working on the first problem, and somebody all of a sudden stands up and say, I solved everything, what do I do next? Now it's perfectly clear to you that that person is lying, but the question is, what will happen to your own morality? And what we found was that lots of people cheat more under those conditions. But there could be two theories of why people cheat more under those conditions. The first theory is that people have been shown that in this experiment you can cheat and get away with it. Because once the student said, Mr. Experiment, I solved everything, what do I do next? The experiment said, you finished everything, take the money and go home. So the student demonstrated that in this experiment you can cheat and get away with it. Maybe the students simply understood the lesson, that in this experiment there are no consequences. So from a cost-benefit analysis, you can cheat and get away with it. That's one possibility. The second possibility is that we created a social structure that told the students that other students just like them seem to be cheating, so maybe it is socially acceptable. How could we separate those two theories? The way we did it was to change the outfit and therefore the social belongingness of the acting student. In this experiment, all the students were students at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. All the students were there, the acting students from Carnegie Mellon, so they all belong to the same social group. In the second condition, we changed it so that the student was wearing a University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. Now, the sweatshirt basically told other people that he was not part of their social group, he was part of a different group. What happened now? Cheating actually went down. So as I told you, even when the cheating student did not say that they solved everything, there was lots of cheating. But now, when the University of Pittsburgh student was cheating in an egregious way, cheating went down. Why? Because two things happened. One is people became aware of cheating, they thought about it, and therefore they wanted not to do it. And the second thing is that it was clear to them it was this other student from this other university that they don't like that much, that were the cheating, and they want to distance themselves from it. And this is actually an interesting experiment because it tells us that when people in the in-group, in our social group, in the in-group cheat, we find it more acceptable to cheat a bit more. But when people from the out-group cheat, it might actually work the other way around and backfire. And from that perspective, you can think about what happens in places like Wall Street, or what happens in places like Washington, when people are surrounded by other people from their own social group to a large degree. Politicians hang out with politicians and bankers hang out with bankers. What happens when they get social cues of some dishonesty from people in their group? Does it basically escalate the understanding of what is acceptable and not acceptable? You can think about accountants, financial advisor, all of those groups, I think, in similar way. So let me kind of summarize what I think is the main point up to now. And the main point is that people are fantastic rationalizing machines. When something is in our best interest, we can see the world in a way that makes us believe that our best interest is actually reality. And this is something that we all see very well when we, for example, are a fan of some sports team. we all recognize that if a judge called a call against our team, we would think that the judge is, an idiot, evil, vicious, blind, something like that. And we all understand that we're biased in that way. And you know what? I don't mind so much. In fact, I think it might actually make sports more fun. The fact that we get so involved and so biased. But the problem with conflicts of interest and wishful blindness is that it's not just in sports. It's also in medicine and accounting and finance. And of course, it's on Wall Street. And imagine the following thought experiment. Ask yourself whether if I paid you $5 million a year, if you too would not be able to see mortgage-backed securities as a good product. And I think your answer would probably be yes. And I don't mean that you will know in your heart that they are bad products, but that you just need to say that they are good because that gets you more money. I mean that you would truly believe that they are good products. Now, I don't think that you would be able to switch your opinion from thinking that they are terrible to think they are wonderful with no problem. But I think that you could slightly shift your opinion in favor of what's selfishly good for you. That's point one. The second point is that what if it was difficult to calculate the real value of mortgage-backed securities? What if it was complex? You were sitting there with a big Excel file with parameters and equations and assumptions, and some of those assumptions and some of those parameters were better for you personally. Couldn't you shift something from being 4.1 to 4.2, at the same time believing that you're doing something that is right for your clients just because it was good for you? And I think, again, the answer is yes. Much like the token experiment, the more difficult and ambiguous and complex you make the environment, the more capable we would be to find places where we could cheat and still feel good about ourselves. And finally, what if everybody around you were doing the same thing? What if everybody around you was doing the same decision? Wouldn't that help you even further to believe that this was the right thing to do? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. So, what do I think is the basic mistake that happened on Wall Street? I think it was a problem with conflict of interest. That if you take good people and you put them in situation of bad conflicts of interest, you should expect them to basically fail. There's no other reasonable thing to do. And because we all fail in conflicts of interest, we all don't see them. It's one of those irrationalities when we can sometimes see it on other people, but it's very hard for us to see how we ourselves are influenced by conflicts of interest. And I think this kind of brings us back to financial advising and accounting and asking ourselves, are we all conflicted? Where are the cases that we have conflicts of interest? And is it possible that those conflicts of interest are blinding us? And again, don't look at it for yourself because we can't see how those things are influencing us. Look at other people and think to yourself whether the conflicts of interest there are in finance, advising, accounting, are they coloring people's view? And of course, what can you do with it about it? Because the reality is that conflicts of interest have this deep functioning. They work on us in a deep way, and we don't see how they work, but they nevertheless get us to do things that are not good for our clients. Think about the following example. Imagine that you could go in front of a judge that you knew got paid by getting 5% or 1% of the verdict that they pass. Would you want to go in front of that judge? Not very likely. Why would we want to create other incentive systems that are based on the same principle? So my basic recommendation from this point is for you to take a deep, hard look at your own practice, at the profession, and ask yourself, where do we have conflicts of interest? And if we are willing to accept the fact that conflicts of interest are deep, pervasive, and that as long as we have them, we're not going to see reality in the correct way, how do we eradicate them? How do we limit them, eliminate them? How do we get over them? And it's not simple to do, but I think it is very important for your own professional integrity and for the well-being of your customers. By the way, the same thing happens in medicine. Right? Medicine has tremendous problems with conflicts of interest, and because of this, we are killing people, doing lots of unnecessary treatments. I mean, there's lots of problems in medicine. And again, if you look outside of your profession, it's usually easy to see these problems than to see them inside. But I think it's important to see them on the inside. There's a couple of more things I want to mention. One is that we've asked ourselves, what are personality traits that get people to cheat more? And of course, there's many of them, and we haven't tested many. But ask yourself for a second, if you believe in this story that most of the cheating that we see is about good people telling themselves stories about why what they did is actually okay, what personality trait would you expect would predict dishonesty? And it turns out it's not intelligence, it's creativity. The idea is basically that creative people are better able to tell themselves stories about why what they have done is actually honest. So creative people can at the same time be dishonest and tell themselves stories about why what they're doing is actually honest. And we did this both at the university, when we measured people's creativity, as well as in a big advertising company, in which we got people at different parts of the organization to take our study, and we measured both how much they cheated and how creative their job demanded them to be, and we found a nice correlation between the kind of job they had and the amount of cheating that they were willing to do. I also want to go back to this story with the insurance agency, the insurance company. In total in our experiments, we've tested up to now about 25,000 people, more or less. And from those 25,000 people, we found about 10 who were big cheaters. 10 that were kind of like maybe the architects of Enron. And, in total, we've lost to those 10 people or so $100 and some dollars. Not too bad, right? In contrast, we had about 15,000 of little cheaters, people who just cheated by a couple of questions. Not too bad, but in total, we've lost to them about $30,000. And I think that's actually kind of reflecting what is happening in society. If you think about it, blue-collar crime is actually, we pay lots of attention to it, but economically, it's actually not that impactful. The average loss in the U.S. from a burglary is about $1,200, not that much. The criminal who breaks and enters and steals probably get $150 to $200 from this. It is not a lot of money in the big scheme of things. I mean, it's very sad, it's depressing. I had my car broken into twice and the GPS was stolen, and it's annoying and unpleasant. But financially, those are not big outcomes compared to what can happen to people with their accountants, lawyers, bankers, financial advisors. So much like in our experiment, I think the big cheating is something that we worry about, but in fact it's a small part of the population stealing egregiously, but it's tiny compared to the amount that good people can cheat and still feel good about themselves in terms of the financial consequences. I have two more things I want to say. One is a question about cultural differences. People come from all kinds of society and all kinds of places, and the question is, do people from different cultures cheat differently? So we decided to try it out. I grew up in Israel, as you can probably tell from my accent. So the first place I went to check was Israel. How much do the Israelis cheat compared to the Americans? And just think about it for yourself for a second and think whether you believe that the Israelis cheat more or less than the Americans. What we found is that they cheat just the same. My Italian collaborator was sure that the Italians would cheat more than the Americans. We found that they cheat just the same. My Chinese collaborator was sure that they would cheat more, that the Chinese would cheat more than the Americans. They cheat just the same. The British cheat just the same. We have many more countries to test, and we haven't finished this yet. But here is my current understanding of the cross-cultural difference. Our task is inherently acultural. It's not embedded in a culture. It doesn't have any elements of the culture. It's about an abstract task in which people can cheat in a general way. And I think that in this general abstract task, people basically are the same. However, if we do look at what the role of culture is, and I think culture has a role, it's in tasks that are embedded in the local culture. Cultures basically say two things. They take some things in and out of the moral domain. For example, is cheating on your spouse cheating or not cheating? Different cultures came out with different answers to this question. And In some cultures it's cheating, and in some it's not. It's cheating on your taxes, cheating or not cheating. Is it cheating or not cheating? Different cultures have come up with different answers for this as well. So culture, the first thing they do is they take some tasks and put them in and some tasks out of the moral context. The second thing is I think that tasks can also change what is an acceptable fudge factor. Is the fudge factor of 15%, 20%, 25%, 30%? I think that's again something that the culture can do. But anyway, we have much more work to do in this regard. The final thing I want to tell you is that we've looked at what happened to cheating over time. So everything I told you so far has been about one-time cheating. We gave people one opportunity to cheat. What happens when people have lots and lots of opportunities to cheat? So we created a much simpler task in which people could participate in it a couple of 100 times. Every judgment was very simple, and they could just make 10 cents or 1 cent for each judgment. And what we found is that for a while, as people were playing this game, they were cheating just a little bit, as if they were trying to balance feeling that they're good people, but at the same time benefiting from cheating a little bit. But what we found that was at some point, lots of people started cheating all the time. And it was kind of an interesting transition. It was a one-time transition in which people moved from cheating a little to cheating a lot. And each person had the transition happen in a different place, but 80% of the people had this transition from cheating a little bit to cheating all the time. And the question, why do we have this transition? And right now we think about it, we call it the what the hell effect. If you think about it, imagine that you're trying to balance being good and cheating a little bit, being good and cheating a little bit, and at some point you can no longer hold the position that you're a good person. At some point you say, you know what, I'm a cheat. I might as well enjoy it. And this I might as well enjoy it is the what the hell effect, in which gets people to start cheating all the time. Now, if that's the situation, if a client who's been cheating for a while has no incentive to stop cheating, if an advisor who's been cheating for a while has no reason to stop cheating, we can ask ourselves, what can get people to stop? Right? If we're in the what the hell effect that says, I'm a bad person, I might as well enjoy it, what can get us to stop? And we thought, maybe the Catholic confession can help us here. And this is no offense, no meaning is an offense to Catholics, but you can ask yourself, isn't the Catholic confession kind of a strange mechanism? I mean, if you could sin and get absolved, wouldn't you just sin even more? In fact, in the Catholic confession rules, wouldn't you sin on the way to church and then immediately get absolved? But this doesn't seem to be the case. So how does confession work? And there could be all kinds of ways that confession could work. It could be the case that you think in advance to confession and you say, not only do I have a chance to being caught, I also have to talk to this preacher and it will be unpleasant. Not worth it. You can also think that you, much like the Ten Commandment experiment, you just came out of a session, you feel pure and wonderful, and you're asking yourself, or you want to keep that feeling for a bit longer, so you stay more moral for a while. Or you can think that confession can actually zero the bad behavior and start a new page. And we've tried this in experiments. So again, we give people many chances to cheat. They cheat a little bit, then they start cheating a lot. And then we give them a chance to confess. They get a chance to write something on a piece of paper on some behavior that they regret, and then they get to say they're sorry to whatever deity they believe in. And what we basically find is that after this confession, people dramatically reduce their cheating to the early level. Now later on they keep on cheating again, but at least for a while it reduces cheating dramatically. And I find this very optimistic, and in fact I think that it's interesting to think about what it means in terms of how we should get people, not just in religious ceremonies, but how can we get people to more generally open new pages and have new beginnings. Okay, so this was basically all I wanted to say for this lesson. If you're interested, I basically covered the last 2 chapters of my first book in this lecture. So I think it was chapter 10 and 11 of Predictably Irrational, which is my first book. You don't have to read now because you've covered them. And I also want to say that if you're interested in more of this material, I have these two books, Predictably Irrational, that I mentioned, that mostly deal with the psychology of money, how people think about money, what mistakes we make about money, and so on. And my newest book is called The Upside of Irrationality, which deals with topics that have to do more with work life and personal life, but they include things like trust and revenge, and what are the effects of bonuses and meaning, and how do we find happiness in life. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I hope you'll enjoy the books. But more than that, I want you to take this behavioral economic lens, and I want you to reflect back on your profession and on your financial duties and obligation, and think to yourself, where could it be that you have a blind spot for the way that irrational behaviors and influences are affecting you in ways that are not ideal for your clients? And what does it mean in terms of creating better procedures? If you leave it to yourself to make the right decision every time, you would most likely fail repeatedly. We can have great intentions from our own behavior, but as anybody who's ever gone to a restaurant and said they will be on a diet, and then the waiter comes with chocolate souffle and they fail, as anybody who had this experience knows, we are not that good in resisting temptation and making the right rational decision every moment. Instead, what we need to do is we need to think about how do we create procedures and regulations and forms and an environment in which we're much more likely to behave in a way that we would want ourselves and want other people to behave. So, I hope this was useful for you. Best of luck. And that's it. Take care.
This concludes the audio portion of the course. On behalf of the Profile Financial Institute, we'd like to thank you for listening, and we hope you found the course both interesting and informative. Please proceed back to the Profile Financial Institute website, www.profile-institute.com, to take the short post-course test. The CFB board mandates that you complete a test to gain CE credit from a self-study CE course. Our test format is true-false, and you'll earn 1 hour of CE credit with a 70% or better score. Upon successful course completion, we'll promptly notify the CFP board electronically on your behalf, and an email confirmation will be sent to you once the CE credit is officially recorded. Please allow up to 2 weeks for proper processing. On our website, you can also download the full course transcript and a one-page summary tear sheet. Be sure to check back with us each month for other timely, interesting, and relevant continuing education courses designed to inform and inspire certified financial planners. And as a reminder, all of our CE courses are offered to you at no cost and at no obligation. For comments and questions, please email ce@profile-financial.com.